They did a kind of experiment at a grocery store a few years ago. What they did was they set up two different display tables that both were selling jelly. At the one display table, they had 24 different kinds of jelly that you could choose from. But at the other display table, they had only 6 kinds of jelly to choose from. Well, between those two tables, which table do you think sold more jelly? It wasn't even close. The table that had 6 kinds of jelly on it sold 10 times the amount of jelly that the other table did. So the researchers conducting that experiment tried to figure out why people made the decisions that they did. After all, it would seem logical that if people went to the table that had the greater variety, the table that had 24 different kinds of jelly to choose from, that surely everyone could find exactly the kind of jelly that they would want there. But what they found out was that people shied away from that table because there were just too many choices and decisions to be made there. That in order for someone to say yes and buy one of those kinds of jelly, they had to be willing to say no to 23 other kinds, and that just stressed most people out. And so they went over to the other table where there were fewer decisions to make and ended up buying one of those jellies. There's been a lot of research done and a lot of books written in recent years about why people make the decisions that they do. For instance, some years ago, the Williams-Sonoma Company came out with one of the first bread-making machines at a cost of $275. But it was a huge flop. People figured that that was way too expensive. So the company did a little research into how people decide what to buy or not to buy. And what they ended up doing was developing an even larger bread-making machine that cost 50% more. And when they put that on the shelf, all of a sudden, the original bread makers that still cost $275 started flying off the shelves. What they found was that since bread-making machines were new at that time, people really didn't have an idea what they should cost. But when people saw on the shelves a larger model that cost a lot more and a smaller model that was cheaper in comparison, people figured that that smaller model had to be a good deal, and they bought it like crazy. Decisions. Today on Palm Sunday, as we begin Holy Week, have you ever noticed how the Holy Week story focuses around the decisions made by a few key people? First off, there was the decision that Judas made to betray Jesus. As you may recall, Judas decided to accept a bribe of 30 pieces of silver in order to show the authorities where Jesus would be so that they could arrest him. As far as the gospel writers were concerned, Judas made his decision based primarily on greed. And some of the gospel writers even go so far as to say that Judas had a pattern of greed, that he regularly stole from the disciples' treasury. At a distance of some 2,000 years, we might shake our heads and wonder why Judas did what he did. But are there times in our lives when, like Judas, we make decisions based on greed, based on money. It's like a holy man from India who was visiting in New York City. One day, his host decided to take him down into a subway station during the morning rush hour so that he could see what that was like. Well, everywhere the holy man looked, he saw men and women carrying briefcases, running, rushing to get onto the trains, pushing and shoving to get ahead of each other. The holy man turned to his host and asked, "Why are those people doing that? Is there a wolf behind them?" The host said, "No, there's not a wolf behind them. There's a dollar sign in front of them." Are there times when, like Judas, we make decisions based on money, based on greed? But in addition to the decision that Judas made, the Holy Week story also tells us about the decision that Peter made. As you may recall, after Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane and led away by the soldiers, Peter decided to follow along at a distance to see what would happen to Jesus. And as they took Jesus inside the house of the high priest to put him on trial, Peter stood outside warming himself by a fire. But as he stood there, different people kept coming up to him and asking him if he wasn't one of Jesus' disciples. And 3 times Peter vehemently denied that he even knew who Jesus was. I suppose we could say that Peter made his decision based on playing it safe. It's like the story of a priest who was called to the bedside of a dying man. The priest said to the man, "I urge you, denounce the devil and tell him how little you think of his ways." But the man made no response. So again, the priest said, "Denounce the devil and reject evil." But again, the man remained silent. So the priest asked him, "Why are you refusing to denounce the devil?" The man said, "Well, I want to play it safe. Until I'm really sure which way I'm headed, I don't want to tick off the wrong person." Are there times when, like Peter, we make decisions based on playing it safe? But yet another person in the Holy Week story who makes a decision is the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. The religious leaders know that they are not allowed to put Jesus to death unless the Roman governor gives his consent. But as Pilate looks at the case that's brought before him, right away he can tell that Jesus has not done anything that is deserving of death. And so Pilate is inclined to just release Jesus and to let him go. But when the religious leaders start stirring up the crowd and the people start chanting, "Crucify him, crucify him," Pilate then just decides to go along with what the crowd wants. And he hands Jesus over to be crucified. Are there times in our lives when, like with Pontius Pilate,